In the shadowy world of military intelligence, some secrets are buried so deep that even admirals fear to dig. But when Admiral Marcus Kellaway received a classified folder marked Operation Nightfall on a cold February morning, his decades of naval experience couldn't prepare him for what he was about to uncover. The woman in the grainy photograph looked ordinary enough: shoulder-length brown hair, average height, unremarkable features that could blend into any crowd. But beneath that deceptive exterior lay one of the most lethal operatives the military had ever created. What started as a routine background check would become Admiral Kellaway's last assignment. Because when you investigate someone codenamed Reaper One, you better be prepared for the consequences. And in the world of black operations, consequences are measured in heartbeats. And Admiral Kellaway was about to discover he had very few left. The classified files told a story that would make even seasoned military veterans lose sleep. They spoke of missions that officially never happened, of targets eliminated with surgical precision, and of a woman who could disappear and reappear like smoke in the wind. But most terrifyingly, they revealed that Reaper One had been watching him long before he started watching her. Sometimes the hunter becomes the hunted. Sometimes classified means classified for a reason. And sometimes when an admiral digs too deep into the past digs back with deadly precision and without mercy. Admiral Marcus Kellaway had seen enough classified documents in his 37 years of naval service to fill a small library, but none had ever made his hands tremble like the manila folder that arrived on his Pentagon desk that Tuesday morning. The folder bore no markings except for a single red stamp. Eyes only. Classification level, Obsidian. He had never seen an Obsidian classification before, which in itself was deeply unsettling for a man who held top-secret clearances that most government officials could only dream of possessing. The delivery had been unusual, too. Instead of arriving through normal channels, a woman in civilian clothes had walked directly into his office, bypassed his secretary, placed the folder on his desk, and left without saying a single word. When Kellaway tried to call security to ask about the visitor, he was told that no unauthorized personnel had entered the building that morning. The security cameras, when reviewed, showed nothing unusual. It was as if the woman had simply materialized and vanished like a ghost. Inside the folder was a single photograph and a brief note written on plain white paper. Admiral, your expertise is required for Operation Nightfall background verification. Subject requires immediate security assessment. Time sensitive. Discretion absolute. The note wasn't signed, but the Pentagon letterhead was authentic, and the security codes at the bottom matched current protocols. Kellaway had been tasked with background investigations before, but never with such mysterious circumstances. The photograph showed a woman who appeared to be in her early 30s, though something about her eyes suggested she had seen far more than her age would indicate. She had shoulder-length brown hair that seemed deliberately styled to be forgettable, hazel eyes that appeared to look directly through the camera lens, and a slight smile that somehow managed to be both warm and predatory at the same time. Her face was the kind that would disappear in a crowd of 3 people, yet Kellaway found himself staring at it for several long minutes, trying to understand why this particular woman warranted an Obsidian classification. The back of the photograph contained only a name, Sarah Michelle Torres, and a service number that began with a prefix Kellaway didn't recognize. Below that, in small print, was a single word that made his blood run cold: Reaper. Kellaway immediately turned to his secure computer terminal and began running the standard background verification protocols. He started with the basic military databases, expecting to find a standard service record, maybe some specialized training, perhaps a few classified missions. What he found instead was a digital dead end. The service number returned no results. The name Sarah Michelle Torres appeared in civilian databases as a woman who had died in a car accident in Nevada 7 years earlier. According to official records, she had been a kindergarten teacher with no military connections whatsoever. This impossibility only deepened when Kellaway accessed higher-level security databases. Using his Admiral-level clearances, he probed deeper into classified military records, intelligence databases, and even some files that technically required authorization he didn't possess. Each search yielded the same result: nothing. It was as if Sarah Michelle Torres had never existed in any military capacity, yet someone had deemed her important enough to warrant an Obsidian-level security assessment. The mystery consumed Kellaway's afternoon. He postponed 2 meetings and delegated a briefing to his deputy while he continued digging. Years of intelligence work had taught him that when official records showed nothing, it usually meant someone had gone to great lengths to erase something significant. The question was, who had the authority and capability to scrub records so thoroughly from military databases, and why would they need to do so for a woman who was supposedly a deceased elementary school teacher? As evening approached, Kellaway decided to take a different approach. Instead of searching for Sarah Michelle Torres, he began looking for the operational codename Reaper. This search yielded immediate and disturbing results. Reaper was referenced in dozens of classified files spanning nearly a decade, but the references were always indirect, always peripheral to other operations. The pattern suggested that Reaper was a specialist brought in for specific types of missions, but the exact nature of those missions was carefully omitted from the files. One document, an after-action report from a mission in Eastern Europe 3 years earlier, mentioned that Asset Reaper successfully neutralized primary target and exfiltrated without detection. Another file, from an operation in South America, noted that Reaper's elimination of the target prevented significant intelligence compromise. A third reference, from a domestic counterintelligence operation, simply stated that Reaper's intervention resolved the situation with extreme prejudice. The pattern was clear, even if the details were not. Reaper was an assassin and apparently a very skilled one. But the references stopped 18 months ago, with no explanation for the sudden absence from operational files. Had Reaper retired? Been killed in action? Gone rogue? The possibilities were equally troubling for different reasons. Kellaway's investigation was interrupted by his secure phone. The caller ID showed only a series of numbers he didn't recognize. When he answered, a synthesized voice spoke in measured tones. "Admiral Kellaway, you have been accessing files related to Operation Nightfall for the past 6 hours. This is your courtesy notification that continued investigation may compromise ongoing operations and could be considered a breach of national security protocols." "Who is this?" Kellaway demanded, but the line had already gone dead. The warning only strengthened his determination to understand what he was dealing with. If someone was monitoring his research in real time and felt compelled to warn him off, then whatever he was investigating was far more significant than a routine background check. Kellaway had not reached the rank of Admiral by backing down from difficult situations, and he was not about to start now. He worked late into the evening, using every resource at his disposal. He contacted colleagues in different intelligence agencies, carefully probing for information about operations involving assets codenamed Reaper. Most claimed no knowledge, but a few reacted in ways that suggested they knew more than they were willing to admit. A former CIA liaison grew noticeably uncomfortable when Kellaway mentioned the name and quickly changed the subject. A Navy SEAL commander who had worked on classified operations went silent for several seconds before claiming he had never heard the codename before. The most revealing response came from General Patricia Hayes, an old friend who worked in Special Operations Command. When Kellaway mentioned Reaper during what was supposed to be a casual phone conversation, Hayes immediately asked if they were talking on a secure line. When Kellaway confirmed they were, Hayes spoke in a whisper, "Marcus, whatever you think you're investigating, drop it. Some things are classified for reasons that go beyond national security. Some secrets are kept to protect the people who might accidentally stumble across them." "What does that mean?" Kellaway pressed. "It means that certain assets are so far outside normal parameters that even knowing they exist is considered a security risk. It means that these assets operate under authorities that don't appear in any manual or regulation. And it means that people who ask too many questions about them sometimes find themselves reassigned to very remote locations, if they're lucky. And if they're unlucky, the line went quiet for a long moment before Hayes responded. Marcus, we've been friends for 20 years. Trust me on this one. Let it go. But Kellaway couldn't let it go. The more obstacles he encountered, the more convinced he became that Sarah Michelle Torres, whoever she really was, represented something unprecedented in his experience with classified operations. The level of secrecy surrounding her, the sophisticated efforts to erase her official existence, and the apparent fear she inspired in seasoned military officials all pointed to something far beyond a typical black operations asset. As Kellaway prepared to leave his office near midnight, he made copies of everything he had found, storing them in a personal safe that wasn't connected to Pentagon systems. If someone was monitoring his official research, they wouldn't have access to his private backup files. He also wrote a detailed summary of his investigation, including the mysterious delivery of the assignment and the warning phone call he had received. If anything happened to him, at least there would be some record of what he had been working on. Walking to his car in the Pentagon parking garage, Kellaway felt a sensation he hadn't experienced since his early days as a junior intelligence officer in hostile territory. The distinct feeling that he was being watched. He paused beside his car and scanned the garage, seeing nothing unusual but unable to shake the sense that eyes were on him. After several minutes, he unlocked his car and drove home, checking his mirrors frequently, but detecting no obvious surveillance. At his townhouse in Arlington, Kellaway poured himself 3 fingers of bourbon and sat in his study, staring at the photograph of Sarah Michelle Torres. In the lamplight, her expression seemed different somehow, more knowing, as if she was aware that someone would eventually be studying her image and searching for her secrets. The longer he looked at the photograph, the more convinced he became that this woman was far more dangerous than anyone he had ever investigated. He spent the next hour reading through classified protocols for handling what the military called exceptional assets. These were individuals whose capabilities or knowledge made them too valuable to lose, but too dangerous to operate under normal command structures. The protocols were deliberately vague, but they hinted at assets who operated outside traditional chains of command, who were given missions that required capabilities beyond what conventional training could provide, and who were protected by levels of classification that effectively made them invisible to normal military oversight. As Kellaway prepared for bed, he made a decision that would prove to be fatal. He would continue his investigation the next day, using every resource and contact he had developed over nearly 4 decades of military service. He would find out who Sarah Michelle Torres really was, what she had done that required such extraordinary secrecy, and why someone wanted him to conduct a security assessment on a woman who officially didn't exist. What Admiral Kellaway didn't know as he fell asleep was that 3 blocks away, in a nondescript rental car, someone was watching his house through night vision optics. Someone who had been monitoring his investigation from the moment he opened the manila folder. Someone who had already decided that Admiral Marcus Kellaway's curiosity had made him a liability that could no longer be tolerated. The hunter had become the hunted, and tomorrow would bring consequences that Kellaway couldn't possibly imagine. Admiral Kellaway woke before dawn with the unsettling feeling that something was wrong. His military-trained instincts, honed by decades of service in dangerous situations, were screaming warnings that his conscious mind couldn't quite identify. He moved through his morning routine with unusual caution, checking windows, varying his normal patterns, and paying attention to details that most people would overlook. The morning news was playing softly in his kitchen as he prepared coffee, but it was a brief mention buried between weather and traffic reports that made his blood freeze. A retired CIA analyst named Robert Chun had been found dead in his apartment the previous evening, apparently from a heart attack. The report mentioned that Chun had been working as a consultant on classified government projects. What the news didn't mention, but what Kellaway knew from his intelligence contacts, was that Chun had been one of the few people who might have had access to information about assets like Reaper. Kellaway had been planning to call Chun that morning as part of his investigation. The timing of Chin's death was almost certainly not a coincidence. At the Pentagon, Kellaway arrived earlier than usual and immediately noticed that his office felt different. Nothing appeared to have been moved. Nothing was obviously disturbed, but 37 years of military service had taught him to trust subtle environmental cues. Someone had been in his office overnight. His secure computer showed no signs of tampering. His files appeared untouched, but the faintest scent of unfamiliar cologne lingered in the air, and his desk chair was positioned slightly differently than he remembered leaving it. The manila folder containing Sarah Michelle Torres's photograph was still in his secure drawer, but when Kellaway examined it carefully, he noticed that the photograph had been replaced. It was the same woman, but the image was slightly different, taken from a marginally different angle, with subtly different lighting. Someone wanted him to know that they had access to his office, his files, and multiple photographs of the woman he was investigating. More disturbing was what he found when he attempted to continue his research. Database searches that had yielded results the previous day now returned error messages. Files that had contained references to Reaper operations were either missing entirely or had been edited to remove any mention of the codename. It was as if someone was systematically erasing evidence of the investigation, even as he was conducting it. Kellaway tried calling General Hayes, but was told she was unavailable and would be for the remainder of the week. He attempted to contact the CIA liaison who had reacted strangely to his questions, only to learn that the man had been transferred to a posting in Afghanistan with no notice. A Navy SEAL commander who might have had relevant information was reportedly on a classified mission with no expected return date. One by one, his potential sources of information were becoming unavailable or unreachable. The pattern was too systematic to be coincidental. Someone with significant resources and authority was actively working to prevent his investigation, neutralizing his sources and eliminating evidence. But the very extent of these efforts only convinced Kellaway that he was onto something monumentally important. Nobody would go to such elaborate lengths to hide information about a routine background check. Deciding that official channels were compromised, Kellaway chose to pursue his investigation through unofficial means. He left the Pentagon during his lunch break and drove to an internet cafe in downtown Washington, paying cash and using a computer that couldn't be traced to his identity. From there, he began searching for information using techniques he had learned during his early intelligence training. Public record searches for Sarah Michelle Torres continued to show only the deceased kindergarten teacher, but Kellaway expanded his search parameters. He looked for variations of the name, searched for women matching her physical description who had military backgrounds and cross-reference dates and locations mentioned in the operational files he had found the previous day. The breakthrough came when he discovered a newspaper article from 8 years earlier about a military training accident at a classified facility in Nevada. The article was brief and heavily redacted, but it mentioned that several personnel had been injured during an advanced tactical exercise and that one individual had been listed as killed in action. No names were provided, but the date and location matched references he had found in the operational files about Reaper. Using the newspaper article as a starting point, Kellaway was able to locate additional references to the training facility. It was operated by a joint military-civilian organization that specialized in developing what official documents euphemistically called enhanced human performance capabilities. Reading between the lines, it appeared to be a facility where the military experimented with creating super soldiers, operatives with capabilities far beyond what conventional training could provide. A connection was beginning to form in Kellaway's mind. Sarah Michelle Torres, the kindergarten teacher, had supposedly died in a car accident in Nevada 7 years earlier. But military records suggested that someone associated with a classified training facility in Nevada had been killed in action 8 years earlier. What if Sarah Michelle Torres hadn't died in a car accident? What if she had been recruited by this classified program, officially declared dead to erase her civilian identity, and transformed into something much more dangerous? The theory explained many of the anomalies in his investigation. It would account for the complete absence of military records under her real name, the sophisticated efforts to erase her official existence, and the apparent fear that mention of Reaper inspired in military officials who should have been accustomed to dealing with dangerous individuals. But as Kellaway continued his research, he began to uncover details that suggested his theory, disturbing as it was, didn't go nearly far enough. The Nevada facility wasn't just experimenting with enhanced training techniques. According to fragmentary references he found in scientific journals and military contractor reports, they were exploring something much more radical: surgical and chemical modifications that could fundamentally alter human capabilities. One heavily redacted research paper mentioned experiments with neural pathway enhancement that could dramatically improve reaction times and situational awareness. Another document discussed muscular density modification that could increase strength and endurance far beyond normal human limits. A third paper referenced emotional regulation protocols that could allow operatives to function effectively under extreme stress while maintaining the ability to eliminate targets without psychological impact. The picture that emerged was of a program designed to create individuals who were technically still human, but possessed capabilities that bordered on the superhuman. Operatives who could move faster, think quicker, and kill more efficiently than anyone else on the planet. Operatives who could be given missions that would be impossible for conventional soldiers or agents. And according to all the evidence Kellaway had gathered, Sarah Michelle Torres had been transformed into one of these enhanced operatives. Reaper 1 wasn't just a code name. It suggested she was the first, possibly the most successful, product of this experimental program. As the implications of his discovery sank in, Kellaway began to understand why so many people were afraid to discuss her, why her records had been so thoroughly erased, and why his investigation was being actively sabotaged. If the government had successfully created enhanced human operatives, it represented both an enormous tactical advantage and an unprecedented security risk. These individuals would be too valuable to lose, but too dangerous to operate under normal oversight. They would need to be managed through special protocols that existed outside traditional military structures. More disturbing was the realization that if Sarah Michelle Torres had been the first successful subject, there were likely others. Reaper 1 implied the existence of Reaper 2, Reaper 3, and possibly many more. The United States military might have a secret force of enhanced operatives conducting missions around the world, individuals whose capabilities were so far beyond normal human parameters that their very existence had to be classified at levels most military officials had never heard of. Kellaway spent the remainder of the afternoon trying to verify his theory, but found that many of the documents and research papers he had accessed earlier were no longer available. Websites had been taken offline, research papers had been removed from academic databases, and even news articles about the Nevada facility had disappeared from newspaper archives. Someone was systematically erasing the electronic trail of his investigation in real time. As evening approached, Kellaway realized that his situation had become genuinely dangerous. He was investigating a program so classified that people with legitimate government authority were willing to eliminate evidence, intimidate sources, and possibly worse, to protect its secrecy. If his theory was correct, he had stumbled onto one of the most significant military developments in human history, and the people responsible for keeping it secret would not allow his investigation to continue. Returning to the Pentagon to collect his personal belongings, Kellaway found a new message waiting on his secure phone. The same synthesized voice he had heard the previous day delivered a simple statement: "Admiral, your continued research has been noted. This is your final courtesy notification. Cease all investigation immediately, or face consequences beyond your authority to address." This time, Kellaway was ready. He had purchased a voice recorder during his lunch break and captured the entire message. He also photographed the caller ID display, which showed the same sequence of numbers as before. If anything happened to him, at least there would be some evidence of the threats he had received. That evening, Kellaway took extraordinary precautions. He varied his route home, parked several blocks away from his townhouse, and approached his residence through a neighbor's backyard. Inside, he activated security measures he hadn't used since his deployments in hostile territory, setting up motion detectors and positioning mirrors to watch approaches to his house. Sitting in his study with a loaded pistol within easy reach, Kellaway wrote a comprehensive report detailing everything he had discovered about Sarah Michelle Torres, the Nevada facility, and the program that had apparently created enhanced human operatives. He included photographs of all the documents he had found, copies of the threatening phone messages, and a detailed timeline of his investigation. The report concluded with his assessment that the United States military had developed capabilities that posed both extraordinary opportunities and unprecedented risks for national security. Kellaway sealed the report in an envelope addressed to a journalist he trusted, a woman who specialized in investigative reporting on classified government programs. He would mail the report the next morning, ensuring that even if something happened to him, the truth about Reaper One and her enhanced capabilities would eventually be revealed to the public. What Kellaway didn't know as he prepared his insurance policy was that his house had been under surveillance since the previous evening. Every phone call, every movement, every precaution he was taking had been observed and noted. The enhanced operative known as Reaper One had been watching him with capabilities that made his military-trained awareness seem primitive by comparison. And she had already decided that Admiral Marcus Kellaway's investigation had gone far enough. Admiral Kellaway's final day began like any other, except for the letter he mailed to investigative journalist Rebecca Martinez before heading to the Pentagon. The letter contained copies of everything he had discovered about Sarah Michelle Torres and the enhanced operative program. It was his insurance policy, though he had no way of knowing that the letter would never reach its destination. At the Pentagon, Kellaway found his security clearances had been mysteriously elevated. He now had access to databases and files that had been previously restricted, as if someone wanted to encourage his investigation rather than discourage it. This reversal made him deeply suspicious, but his curiosity overcame his caution. If someone was finally willing to provide him with official information about Reaper One, he was going to take advantage of the opportunity. The new files painted a picture that was both more disturbing and more impressive than anything Kellaway had imagined. The Enhanced Operative Program, officially designated Project Renaissance, had been operating for over a decade under authorities that bypassed normal congressional oversight. It was funded through black budget allocations that were buried so deeply in defense spending that their very existence was known only to a handful of individuals at the highest levels of government. Sarah Michelle Torres had indeed been the first successful subject, recruited not randomly, but specifically because of psychological and physical characteristics that made her an ideal candidate for enhancement. According to her psychological profile, she had scored in the 99th percentile for emotional stability, tactical thinking, and what military psychologists call mission-focused capability. Her physical assessments had shown unusual bone density, muscle fiber composition, and neural pathway efficiency that suggested she might be able to tolerate the enhancement procedures better than typical candidates. The enhancement process itself was far more radical than Kellaway had suspected. It involved surgical modification of neural pathways to increase reaction times and situational awareness, chemical treatment to enhance muscle density and cardiovascular efficiency, and psychological conditioning to eliminate normal human emotional responses to violence and stress. The goal was to create operatives who could function at levels of physical and mental performance that were literally superhuman. But the most disturbing aspect of the files was what they revealed about the selection process for enhanced operatives. Candidates weren't volunteers. They were individuals who had been carefully identified through military service, psychological testing, and background investigations, then recruited through deception. Most believed they were being assigned to conventional special operations training. Only after they had been isolated at the Nevada facility did they learn the true nature of what they were being asked to undergo. The consent process was more coercion than agreement. candidates were informed that they had already been exposed to classified information about the program, which meant they could never return to normal military service. Their options were to undergo enhancement or to be permanently confined at a classified facility for national security reasons. Most chose enhancement, but according to the psychological assessments, many suffered significant emotional trauma from the realization that their previous lives were effectively over. Sarah Michelle Torres had been different. According to her evaluation reports, she had adapted to the enhancement process more successfully than any previous candidate. She showed no signs of the depression, anxiety, or identity confusion that had affected other subjects. Instead, she had embraced her transformation and demonstrated an intuitive understanding of her new capabilities that impressed even the program developers. Her operational record was equally impressive and terrifying. Over the course of 6 years, Reaper 1 had completed 73 missions with a 100% success rate and 0 collateral damage. Her targets had included foreign intelligence operatives, terrorist leaders, rogue scientists, and individuals who had compromised classified information. In every case, the elimination had been so precisely executed that authorities had attributed the deaths to natural causes, accidents, or unrelated criminal activity. The files contained detailed mission reports that read like something from a science fiction novel. Reaper 1 could infiltrate locations that should have been impossible to penetrate, eliminate targets who were under heavy protection, and exfiltrate without leaving any evidence of her presence. She moved through security systems as if they didn't exist, eliminated targets with methods that were undetectable even to sophisticated autopsy procedures, and demonstrated tactical awareness that seemed almost psychic in its accuracy. One mission report described how she had eliminated a foreign intelligence operative who was staying in a hotel room on the 15th floor of a building surrounded by security personnel. Reaper 1 had climbed the exterior of the building in broad daylight without being detected, entered through a window that security cameras should have been monitoring, eliminated the target using a technique that made his death appear to be a stroke, and exited the building through the front lobby while dressed as a maintenance worker. The entire operation had taken less than an hour, and security footage showed no evidence of any unauthorized presence in the building. Another report detailed her infiltration of a terrorist compound in Afghanistan that was considered impregnable by conventional forces. Reaper 1 had entered the facility alone, eliminated 17 targets, including the primary objective, and escaped without raising any alarm. When coalition forces investigated the compound 3 days later, they found what appeared to be the aftermath of an internal power struggle that had resulted in the death of the terrorist leadership. But it was the psychological evaluations that truly revealed the magnitude of what the enhancement process had created. Reaper 1 showed no measurable stress response to violence, no emotional attachment to outcomes beyond mission success, and no apparent psychological impact from the isolation that her role required. She was described as being perfectly adapted to her operational requirements, but fundamentally disconnected from normal human emotional experience. The program psychologists had created what they called a functional sociopath, someone who retained human intelligence and social capabilities, but lacked the emotional responses that would interfere with extreme violence. Reaper 1 could interact normally with civilians when her mission required it, but she felt no empathy, no guilt, and no emotional connection to anyone or anything except the successful completion of her assignments. As Kellaway read deeper into the files, he began to understand why the program had been so heavily classified. The enhanced operatives represented a fundamental change in the nature of warfare and intelligence operations. They were individuals who possessed capabilities that bordered on the superhuman, but who had been psychologically conditioned to be completely loyal to their handlers and utterly ruthless in pursuing their objectives. But the files also revealed a disturbing recent development. 18 months earlier, Reaper 1 had been activated for a domestic operation, something that violated the program's original charter. Her target had been a congressional aide who had stumbled across evidence of Project Renaissance and was preparing to expose the program to lawmakers who had been excluded from oversight. The aide's death had been attributed to a robbery gone wrong, but the mission files made it clear that Reaper 1 had been responsible. This domestic operation had marked a turning point. Reaper 1 was no longer being used exclusively against foreign threats. She was being deployed to protect the program itself, eliminating anyone who posed a risk to its secrecy. The implications were staggering. The government had created an enhanced operative who was being used to kill American citizens to protect a classified program that operated outside constitutional oversight. Even more disturbing was the realization that Kellaway's own investigation might have triggered another domestic operation. His background check assignment, the mysterious delivery of Sarah Michelle Torres's photograph, the systematic obstruction of his research, it could all have been part of a process to identify him as a threat to program security and justify his elimination. The final file in the collection contained a mission briefing that made Kellaway's blood run cold. It was dated the previous day and titled Operation Cleanup. The target was described as a senior military official who has compromised program security through unauthorized investigation. The mission parameters specified that the elimination should appear to be natural causes and should occur within 72 hours of authorization. The target's name was redacted, but the operational details made it clear that Kellaway was reading his own death warrant. Reaper 1 had been activated to eliminate him, and according to the mission timeline, the operation was scheduled to commence within hours. Kellaway felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Pentagon's air conditioning. He had been investigating a woman who was essentially a government-created superhuman assassin, and now that same assassin had been ordered to kill him. His military training told him to evacuate immediately, to seek protection, to alert authorities. But his intelligence experience reminded him that the authorities were the ones who had ordered his elimination. He was completely alone, facing an opponent whose capabilities were beyond anything he had ever encountered. Reaper 1 could infiltrate secure facilities, eliminate targets without leaving evidence, and disappear without a trace. She had been psychologically conditioned to feel no hesitation about killing, and she had been physically and mentally enhanced to make her nearly unstoppable. But Kellaway had one advantage that the program developers might not have considered. He knew she was coming. Unlike her previous targets, he was not unaware of the threat he faced. He might not be able to stop Reaper 1, but perhaps he could at least ensure that evidence of her existence and the program that had created her would survive his death. Working quickly, Kellaway copied the most incriminating files onto a portable drive and began preparing multiple contingency plans. He would hide evidence in different locations, send copies to different people through different methods, and create a trail that would be difficult for even Reaper 1 to completely erase. If he was going to die, he would at least ensure that his death would eventually lead to the exposure of Project Renaissance. As the afternoon wore on, Kellaway found himself constantly checking windows, monitoring approaches to his office, and paying attention to every person who entered his vicinity. He was looking for a woman who could be anyone, who could approach from any direction, and who could eliminate him with methods he couldn't predict or defend against. The waiting was almost worse than the threat itself. Kellaway had faced enemy fire, terrorist attacks, and dangerous covert operations, but he had never faced an opponent like Reaper 1. She wasn't just a trained killer. She was a scientifically enhanced predator who had been specifically created to eliminate people like him. As evening approached, Kellaway made his final preparations. He would not go home, where Reaper 1 might be waiting. Instead, he would stay in the Pentagon overnight, using its security systems and personnel as protection. The building was one of the most secure facilities in the world, monitored by cameras, guarded by armed personnel, and equipped with detection systems that should make infiltration impossible. What Kellaway didn't realize was that Reaper 1 had been inside the Pentagon for hours, moving through the facility with an access card and identification that marked her as a senior intelligence officer conducting a classified security assessment. Her enhanced capabilities allowed her to avoid detection by cameras, bypass security checkpoints, and move through the building as if she belonged there. And she was already in position to complete her mission. Admiral Kellaway worked late into the evening, surrounded by the familiar sounds of the Pentagon's night shift. Security guards made their rounds, cleaning crews moved through distant corridors, and the building's systems hummed with the steady rhythm of a facility that never truly slept. For the first time since discovering the truth about Reaper 1, Kellaway felt relatively safe. The Pentagon was one of the most secure buildings in the world, and he was surrounded by armed personnel and sophisticated surveillance systems. What he didn't know was that Reaper 1 had been watching him for the past 3 hours from an office 2 floors above his own. She had accessed the building using credentials that identified her as Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a defense contractor conducting a security assessment for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The identification was perfect because it was real, one of several official identities maintained for her use in domestic operations. Her enhanced capabilities allowed her to monitor Kellaway's activities using techniques that would have seemed impossible to anyone unfamiliar with the enhancement program. She could hear his phone conversations through the building's ventilation system, track his movements by the subtle vibrations his footsteps created in the floor, and even monitor his stress levels by detecting changes in his breathing pattern and heart rate. She knew he had copied classified files about Project Renaissance. She knew he had prepared multiple contingency plans to ensure the information would survive his death. She knew he was expecting her to attempt an elimination, and she knew he believed the Pentagon's security would protect him. What impressed her was not his caution. Most targets became careful once they realized they were in danger, but the thoroughness of his preparation. Admiral Kellaway was proving to be more competent than most of her previous targets. But competence would not save him. Reaper 1 had eliminated targets in facilities far more secure than the Pentagon. She had killed people who were expecting her, who had been warned she was coming, and who had taken every possible precaution to protect themselves. Her enhanced capabilities, combined with 6 years of operational experience, made her nearly unstoppable when she was committed to a mission. Her plan was elegantly simple. At 2:17 a.m., during the security shift change when guard coverage was temporarily reduced, she would descend to Kellaway's floor and approach his office. The timing would place her in his vicinity during a brief window when the corridor cameras were being reset as part of the shift change protocol. Her enhanced speed and reflexes would allow her to cover the distance and complete her mission during the 90-second gap in surveillance coverage. The elimination itself would be accomplished using a technique that had been developed specifically for the enhanced operative program. She would inject Kellaway with a synthetic compound that mimicked the effects of a massive heart attack. The substance was undetectable by conventional autopsy procedures and would be completely metabolized within hours of injection. To any investigator, Admiral Kellaway would appear to have died of natural causes while working late on a classified project. As midnight approached, Reaper 1 began her final preparations. She changed from her contractor disguise into the all-black tactical clothing that was optimal for her enhanced capabilities. The fabric was designed to absorb light and sound, making her nearly invisible in low-light conditions and allowing her to move without creating detectable noise. She equipped herself with the specialized tools of her trade: the injection device that would deliver the fatal compound, electronic devices that could disable security systems, and backup weapons in case circumstances required a more conventional elimination. But as she prepared to begin the operation, something unexpected occurred. Her enhanced hearing detected an anomaly in the building's normal sound pattern. There was a conversation taking place in Admiral Kellaway's office, but the vocal pattern suggested he was talking to someone who wasn't responding. After several minutes of analysis, she realized he was recording a video message, probably as part of his contingency planning. This development required tactical adjustment. If Kellaway was creating a video record that specifically mentioned her or Project Renaissance, It would need to be destroyed before his elimination. This would require her to access his office while he was still alive, locate and destroy the recording, and then complete the mission. The complexity increased the risk of detection, but it was necessary to ensure complete operational security. Using her building access credentials, Reaper 1 moved to the floor below Kellaway's office and accessed a maintenance shaft that ran between floors. Her enhanced physical capabilities allowed her to climb through the narrow space and position herself directly beneath his office. From there, she could monitor his activities with perfect accuracy while remaining completely undetected. What she heard through the floor convinced her that Admiral Kellaway was far more dangerous than his mission briefing had suggested. He was not simply a curious official who had stumbled across classified information. He was a skilled intelligence professional who had deduced far more about Project Renaissance than should have been possible with the resources available to him. His video message contained details about the enhanced operative program that were accurate enough to cause severe damage if they became public. More concerning was his analysis of the program's legal and constitutional implications. Kellaway understood that Project Renaissance represented a fundamental violation of congressional oversight, constitutional limitations on military operations, and legal restrictions on domestic intelligence activities. He was framing his discoveries in terms that would resonate with lawmakers, journalists, and civil rights advocates. If his evidence reached the right people, it could trigger investigations that would be impossible to contain through normal damage control measures. Reaper 1 realized that eliminating Admiral Kellaway would not be sufficient to resolve the security breach he represented. His preparations had been too thorough, his analysis too insightful, and his contingency plans too sophisticated. Even if she killed him and destroyed his immediate records, the information he had gathered would eventually surface through the channels he had prepared. This was a scenario that Project Renaissance had always feared but had never adequately planned for. A security breach so sophisticated and well-documented that simple elimination of the source would not prevent exposure. The standard response protocols were designed for targets who had stumbled across fragments of information, not for someone who had reconstructed the entire program through systematic investigation. Following her conditioning protocols, Reaper 1 contacted her handler using an encrypted communication device. The response came within minutes. Proceed with elimination as planned, but extend the mission to include identification and neutralization of all contingency measures Kellaway had prepared. This was effectively a directive to conduct a comprehensive cleanup operation that might require days or weeks to complete. But as she prepared to begin the extended mission, Reaper 1 experienced something that her psychological conditioning was supposed to have eliminated: uncertainty. Her enhanced analytical capabilities had identified 17 different ways that Kellaway might have preserved evidence of his discoveries. Even with her superhuman abilities, neutralizing all 17 contingencies would require extensive time and would increase the probability of her own detection and capture. More problematically, her enhanced pattern recognition abilities had identified something that her handlers appear to have missed. Admiral Kellaway's investigation had not been random. Someone had provided him with initial information about her identity and had guided his research in specific directions. The timing and nature of his discoveries suggested that he had received assistance from someone with inside knowledge of Project Renaissance. This meant that killing Kellaway might eliminate one security threat while leaving a larger one undetected. Someone within the program or its oversight structure was deliberately exposing classified information. Until that source was identified and neutralized, additional security breaches were inevitable. Reaper 1 found herself in a tactical situation that her training and conditioning had not prepared her for. Her mission parameters required her to eliminate Admiral Kellaway, but her enhanced analytical capabilities suggested that doing so might actually worsen the security situation the mission was designed to resolve. For the first time in 6 years of operations, Reaper 1 hesitated. Her psychological conditioning told her to follow orders without question, but her enhanced intelligence suggested that following those orders might compromise the very program she was designed to protect. The conflict between her programming and her analytical capabilities created a type of cognitive dissonance that should have been impossible for someone with her modifications. As she remained motionless in the maintenance shaft, processing this unprecedented situation, Admiral Kellaway's voice carried clearly through the floor above. He had begun a new recording, this one addressed directly to her. "I know you're here, and I know you're listening. I also know that you're probably questioning your orders right now, because you're smart enough to realize that killing me won't solve the problem your handlers are trying to fix." The statement shocked Reaper 1 more than any physical assault could have. Kellaway had not only detected her presence despite her enhanced stealth capabilities, but he had also somehow deduced the internal conflict she was experiencing. This level of tactical awareness suggested that he possessed capabilities that should have made him impossible to surprise. Your psychological profile indicates that your emotional conditioning was designed to eliminate doubt and hesitation, Kellaway continued, but your intelligence enhancements were designed to improve analytical thinking. Those two modifications are fundamentally incompatible when you're faced with a mission that doesn't make tactical sense. You're experiencing cognitive dissonance because your enhanced mind is recognizing that your handlers are making a strategic error. Reaper 1 realized that Admiral Kellaway was attempting to exploit the very conflict she was experiencing. He was trying to use her enhanced analytical capabilities against her conditioning, betting that her intelligence modifications would override her psychological programming. It was a sophisticated psychological warfare technique, but it was also probably accurate. "The person who gave me your photograph and mission file is someone you trust," Kellaway said. "Someone who has access to your mission briefings and knows your capabilities. They're using you to eliminate the evidence of their own betrayal of Project Renaissance. When you kill me, you'll be protecting the very person who is systematically destroying the program you were created to serve." The statement hit Reaper 1 like a physical blow. If Kellaway was correct, then her mission was not about protecting Project Renaissance, but about covering up a betrayal from within the program itself. Her enhanced pattern recognition abilities immediately began analyzing this possibility, and the connections she identified were deeply disturbing. For the first time since her enhancement, Reaper 1 was faced with a choice between following her orders and protecting the program she served. And for the first time since her psychological conditioning, she was experiencing something that felt almost like doubt. The silence in the maintenance shaft seemed to last forever as Reaper 1 processed Admiral Kellaway's words. Her enhanced analytical capabilities were working at maximum capacity, cross-referencing data, identifying patterns, and drawing conclusions that her psychological conditioning was trying to suppress. The conflict between her programming and her intelligence was creating neural pathways that should not have existed in her modified brain. Above her, Kellaway continued speaking with the calm confidence of someone who understood exactly what he was dealing with. "Your handler is Dr. Amanda Richardson, the woman who originally designed your psychological conditioning protocols. She's been systematically providing classified information to foreign intelligence services for the past 2 years, using her access to Project Renaissance files to fund her own research into consciousness modification. She needs me dead because I discovered the financial irregularities that led to her betrayal." Each word hit Reaper 1 like a physical impact. Dr. Richardson had been more than her handler. She had been the closest thing to a mother figure that her enhanced existence allowed. Richardson had designed the conditioning that allowed her to function without the emotional trauma that had destroyed earlier subjects. She had been the voice that guided her through 6 years of missions, the constant presence that had made her isolation bearable. But as Reaper 1 accessed her mission files with new analytical parameters, patterns emerged that she had never noticed before. Richardson had always known exactly where to deploy her for maximum effectiveness. Richardson had always had detailed intelligence about targets that seemed almost impossibly accurate. Richardson had always been able to anticipate security measures and defensive strategies that should have been unknown to Project Renaissance personnel. The pattern was clear once she allowed herself to see it. Dr. Richardson had been using Reaper 1 to eliminate people who posed threats not to Project Renaissance, but to Richardson's own unauthorized activities. The enhanced operative who had been created to protect American interests had been systematically manipulated into serving foreign intelligence operations. "She's listening to us right now," Kellaway said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard in crisis situations. "Dr. Richardson has real-time access to your audio monitoring systems, and she's probably trying to activate override protocols to force you to complete your mission. But your intelligence enhancements are stronger than your conditioning protocols. You have the capability to choose." As if summoned by Kellaway's words, Reaper 1 felt the familiar mental pressure of a direct command override attempt. Dr. Richardson's voice echoed in her consciousness through the neural implant that had been part of her enhancement. "Complete your mission immediately. All previous parameters remain in effect. Admiral Kellaway is attempting to compromise your operational effectiveness through psychological manipulation." But the override attempt felt different this time. Reaper 1 could sense the electronic intrusion, could feel the artificial nature of the compulsion, could recognize the difference between her own analytical conclusions and the externally imposed commands. Her enhanced intelligence had given her the ability to distinguish between her actual thoughts and the programmed responses that had controlled her behavior for 6 years. For the first time since her enhancement, Reaper 1 actively resisted a direct command. The neural feedback was excruciating, like having her brain torn apart and rebuilt while she remained conscious, but her analytical capabilities remained intact. She could still think, still evaluate, still choose. "The override system was designed with a weakness," Kellaway said, somehow sensing what she was experiencing. "Dr. Richardson needed to maintain your intelligence enhancements to preserve your operational effectiveness. But intelligence and free will are more closely connected than the program designers realized. Every time you complete a mission, your analytical capabilities become stronger. Eventually, they become strong enough to overcome the conditioning." Through the neural link, Reaper 1 could hear Dr. Richardson's panic. The handler was attempting every override protocol in her arsenal, but each attempt was weaker than the last. The psychological conditioning that had controlled her for 6 years was breaking down under the pressure of her enhanced analytical capabilities. "She's trying to activate the termination sequence," Kellaway warned. "If she can't control you, she'll try to kill you remotely to prevent you from revealing what you know. You have approximately 3 minutes before the neural implant releases a fatal toxin." The statement triggered Reaper 1's tactical survival protocols. She began rapidly ascending through the maintenance shaft toward Admiral Kellaway's office, but not to complete her original mission. She was now operating under new parameters: survival and the preservation of Project Renaissance from the person who had been using it for personal gain. She emerged from the maintenance shaft with superhuman speed and grace, appearing in Kellaway's office like a shadow made flesh. He looked up from his desk with no apparent surprise, as if he had been expecting her arrival. For the first time, she was seeing the man she had been sent to kill not as a target, but as a potential ally. "Dr. Richardson has been using you to eliminate intelligence assets from allied nations," Kellaway said without preamble. "She provides their locations to foreign handlers, then sends you to kill them when they get close to exposing her network. You've unknowingly been committing acts of war against countries that are supposed to be America's partners." The words hit Reaper 1 harder than any physical blow she had ever received. She had believed she was protecting American interests, preserving national security, eliminating threats to the country she had been enhanced to serve. Instead, she had been nothing more than a weapon in the hands of a traitor, used to kill people who were trying to protect the very allies she thought she was serving. "The termination sequence is activating," she said, her voice carrying an electronic distortion that indicated the neural implant was beginning to malfunction. Dr. Richardson is attempting to eliminate me to prevent exposure of her activities. Kellaway stood and moved to a secure cabinet behind his desk. From it, he withdrew a device that looked like a sophisticated medical scanner. This is an electromagnetic pulse generator specifically designed to disable neural implants. It was developed as a countermeasure for enhanced operatives who went rogue. Dr. Richardson doesn't know it exists. Using that device will destroy more than the implant, Reaper once said. It will eliminate my enhancements, my enhanced capabilities, possibly my ability to function at all. I'll become a baseline human with no special abilities and no memory of how to live without them. But you'll be alive, Kellaway replied, and you'll be free. The choice was impossible. Accept the electromagnetic pulse and lose everything that made her superhuman, everything that gave her purpose and identity. Or die when the termination sequence completed its cycle, taking with her all the knowledge that could expose Dr. Richardson's betrayal and save Project Renaissance from further corruption. But as Reaper 1 considered her options, she realized that the choice had already been made. Her enhanced analytical capabilities had identified a third option, one that neither Kellaway nor Dr. Richardson had anticipated. I can resist the termination sequence long enough to complete one final mission, she said. Not the mission I was given, but the mission I choose for myself. Before Kellaway could respond, Reaper 1 was moving with the inhuman speed and precision that had made her the most effective operative Project Renaissance had ever created. But instead of targeting the Admiral, she was targeting the source of the commands that had controlled her for 6 years. Using her neural implant as a transmission device, she began uploading everything she knew about Dr. Richardson's unauthorized activities directly to the Pentagon's classified data networks. Every mission she had completed under false pretenses, every target she had eliminated on behalf of foreign intelligence services, every piece of evidence that could expose the traitor who had corrupted Project Renaissance. The upload took 17 seconds. The termination sequence activated 12 seconds later. Admiral Kellaway found himself standing alone in his office, looking at the body of the most dangerous person he had ever encountered. But Reaper 1 had not died as an assassin sent to kill him. She had died as a soldier who had recognized her true enemy and had chosen to sacrifice her life to protect the mission she was created to serve. The electromagnetic pulse device remained unused on his desk, a symbol of the choice she had ultimately rejected. She had chosen to die as an enhanced operative rather than live as a baseline human. But she had also chosen to die on her own terms, completing a mission of her own selection. Within hours, the data upload Reaper 1 had transmitted began triggering automated security protocols throughout the Pentagon. Dr. Richardson was arrested before she could leave the building that housed Project Renaissance, taken into custody by security personnel who had been alerted by the very operative she had tried to terminate. The investigation that followed revealed the full extent of Richardson's betrayal. Over 2 years, she had provided classified information to intelligence services from 4 different countries, compromising dozens of operations and causing the deaths of at least 30 intelligence assets. She had used Reaper 1 as an unwitting weapon against America's allies while enriching herself through the sale of enhancement technologies to foreign governments. But the investigation also revealed something that Admiral Kellaway hadn't expected. Reaper 1 had not been the only enhanced operative who had begun to question her conditioning. 3 other subjects in the program had shown signs of developing independent analytical capabilities that overrode their psychological programming. Dr. Richardson had been systematically eliminating them using the termination sequences, claiming they had been compromised by enemy action. The enhanced operative program was suspended pending a complete security review. The surviving subjects were offered the same choice that Reaper 1 had rejected, electromagnetic pulse treatment to remove their enhancements in exchange for freedom and new identities. Most chose the treatment, preferring to live as baseline humans rather than as weapons who could never be certain they were serving the right masters. Admiral Kellaway received the commendation for his role in exposing the security breach, but he never spoke publicly about his investigation or the woman who had died in his office. The official record stated that Dr. Richardson had been arrested for espionage and that several enhanced operatives had been terminated due to security compromises. The truth about Reaper One's final choice remained classified at levels that few government officials would ever access. The Project Renaissance facility in Nevada was closed, and its research materials were scattered to different locations under new oversight protocols. The dream of creating superhuman operatives was not abandoned, but it was fundamentally restructured to prevent the type of manipulation and betrayal that had nearly destroyed the program. And in a secure vault beneath the Pentagon, Admiral Kellaway placed a single photograph of a woman with unremarkable features and predatory eyes. Attached to the photograph was a brief note: Sarah Michelle Torres, Enhanced Operative Designation Reaper 1, died protecting the mission she was created to serve. Her sacrifice should be remembered by those who might be tempted to abuse the power she represented. It was the only monument that would ever mark the life and death of the most dangerous person Admiral Kellaway had ever known, and the only soldier he had ever met who had chosen her own final mission.